Modern mid-range phones are great, providing last-gen flagship performance and features for far lower prices than they used to go for when these things were considered the bleeding edge. And even older mid-range phones still have a lot of life left in them due to fairly prudent configuration choices and software support. But what if you only had a low-end phone? One which you bought 5 to 6 years ago and are still using it to this day. What would that experience be like? Well, that's what we're going to explore today, courtesy of this phone, the Samsung Galaxy A01. Can this thing still hold up today, or has modern tasks evolved beyond its capabilities? Let's find out. Before we begin this exploration though, let's actually meet the device we'll be evaluating. This right here is a Samsung Galaxy A01, a low-end budget phone released by Samsung in late 2019. It features a low-power Qualcomm Snapdragon 439 SoC with 8 Cortex-A53 cores running at 1.4 to 1.95 GHz, 2 GB of RAM, 16 GB of internal storage, 3000 mAh battery, 5.7-inch 720p display, 13 megapixel main camera with depth sensing capabilities, 5 megapixel front camera for selfies, a micro USB for charging, and most importantly, a headphone jack. Hooray! All jokes aside, modern budget phones pretty much leave this phone in the dust with much more impressive specs. But at the time, it wasn't actually too bad, especially with a 400 tier Snapdragon SoC in an era where low-end craptastic MediaTek SoCs with weak Mali graphics were much more commonplace. Now, in modern performance benchmarks, this poor SoC just can't cope all that well. Even running against budget phones from a couple of years ago, it struggles hard. But the thing is, synthetic benchmarks, even those that claim to represent real-world cases, doesn't always paint the full picture, especially when it comes to the experience of using phones. A lot of that comes from software, and boy do I have some critiques regarding that. For now though, let's go ahead and see if maybe we can run games on this thing. Now, game benchmarks are still a work in progress in mobile for me, but running the latest Minecraft Bedrock version on this thing was playable, which was honestly a surprise to me. But it does show the power of this SoC's graphics. I mean, it's not great with even the lowest render distances. This thing still chugs, but hey, at least it's running, right? Moving on, this camera is something that is definitely out of the times, especially on paper now that even budget phones come equipped with 20 to 30 megapixel main sensors. In actual usage though, this thing is actually kind of okay. It struggles with low light and high contrast scenes, but in well-lit environments, this thing can actually take fairly decent shots. It's still nothing special, especially compared to my A35, which sort of feels like an unfair comparison, but hey, this is my best point of reference, and the fact that the A01 can get passable photos compared to its modern siblings, it's actually pretty impressive. One of the things working for its favor, I think, is the fairly minimal processing made by the system, which sure doesn't give it the same kind of pop that modern phones give their photos, but it does reduce the potential for processing errors, and as you saw in the benchmarks, you do not want to be processing photos with that kind of CPU power. The front camera, meanwhile, is pretty meh, which isn't really a surprise given its piddly 5 megapixel sensor, something which even software can't really mask. That brings us nicely to software experiences, which, funnily enough, is where most of my focus in reviewing phones and phone accessories go to, and for good reason. See, unlike PCs and laptops, which all run pretty much the exact same operating system, in this case Windows, and can run basically the same set of apps, device compatibility be willing, Android phones struggle with fragmentation that leads to differences in features and support that is just difficult to navigate. So with that in mind, I'll do my best here. The A01 originally launched with Android 10, running Samsung's version known as One UI Core, a low-power fork of their OS, One UI, intended for phones with lower-end specs. But impressively, Samsung was actually generous enough to provide this phone with up to Android 12, improving both app compatibility and longevity of support for this device. Sort of that last note, since while Android 12 is great, One UI Core, despite being optimized for this class of hardware, is just a bit too heavy for this phone. Now it works for the most part, and it's certainly better than some of my other old devices around there, which are stuck with older versions of Android, which is just not supported by even common apps anymore. My issue here is mainly the experience. Perhaps I've become too accustomed with my fairly snappy mid-range phones that I'm no longer in touch with how slow low-end phones really are, but from my point of view, I've still used lower-end devices far longer than not, and this genuinely just feels slow, despite my previous experiences and patience in dealing with these kinds of things. To be clear, it's usable, and if you still have one, you can still continue to use it thanks to app compatibility, even with its fairly old battery that's somehow still alive. But devices have gone so much faster in recent years, even with the sort of smartphone stagnation that I've seen, not to mention more advanced features like better cameras, screens, larger batteries, and no more headphone jack. That Oh wait, that last one wasn't actually a selling point. Anyways, the goal of this video was not just to dunk on this phone, by the way, because I actually love using old devices like these, sort of tinkering around and playing with them. In fact, I've been exploring some custom ROMs on this thing if they could work better than One UI, so maybe that's on the horizon, since this is actually a pretty adorable thing to carry around in the era of gigantic phones. It's just not something that I'd use as a daily driver anymore due to the aforementioned performance gauges and other quality of life improvements. But again, if you still have this phone, then you have a phone that still works and would continue to work so long as Android 12 is supported, which could actually last a long time. So kudos Samsung, I guess. And for enthusiasts like me, this is an interesting thing to mess around with, even if I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy one, unless it's like super cheap.